I just got divorced and moved across the world to rebuild my peace. My ex-husband immediately threw a $500,000 wedding to marry his mistress. But during their lavish reception, a single uninvited guest stood up and exposed a dark financial secret that brought his entire fake empire crashing down. Now my phone is ringing in the middle of the night, and my ex-husband is begging for my help while the police surround his venue. My name is Audrey, and I am 33 years old. I work as a forensic accountant. My entire career revolves around finding the money that liars desperately try to hide. For 2 years, I missed the financial anomalies in my own home, but when I finally saw the truth about my marriage, I made sure my exit strategy was completely flawless. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart someone who thought they could walk all over you and watch karma finally catch up to them. It was a pristine Tuesday morning in Italy. I was sitting at a quiet cafe overlooking the shimmering waters of Lake Como, enjoying my first real vacation in years. The sun was warm, my espresso was perfect, and my phone began to vibrate violently against the marble table. The caller ID flashed a name I had not seen since the day we signed our final divorce papers 3 months ago. Bradley, my ex-husband. He was 35 years old, the chief executive officer of a financial tech startup, and a man who prided himself on always being the smartest person in the room. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looked at the gorgeous Italian scenery around me, and calmly swiped the screen to answer the call. I did not even get a chance to say a simple hello before his voice exploded through the speaker. "Audrey, what did you do?" He was screaming, his voice cracking with a level of pure panic I had never heard from him before. In the background, I could hear the distinct wail of police sirens and the chaotic shouting of angry crowds. "What did you do to the company accounts? Richard is here at my wedding. The authorities are here. They are shutting everything down. Tell me you can fix this." I leaned back in my chair and watched a small wooden boat glide peacefully across the lake. "I did absolutely nothing, Bradley," I replied, keeping my voice entirely steady and devoid of any emotion. "I just took exactly what you legally signed away in our divorce settlement. You remember the settlement, right? The one you rushed through at lightning speed so you could quickly marry Serena." Bradley gasped for air on the other end of the line. He sounded like a man who was drowning. "You took everything from me. My company accounts are completely frozen. The business is totally bankrupt. Serena is freaking out in the bridal suite, and her family is screaming at my parents. You set me up. You set yourself up," I told him, refusing to raise my voice. "You demanded to keep 100% of your shiny tech company because you thought it was a gold mine that would fund your new lifestyle. You graciously allowed me to keep my tiny, worthless consulting firm overseas just to get me out of your way and avoid paying alimony. But you were too busy booking penthouses for your 27-year-old mistress to actually read the legal contracts you were signing. If you had paid attention to the fine print, you would have realized my worthless firm owned the copyright to the core software algorithm your entire business relied on. I was just leasing it to you. Today, I officially revoked your license." The sound of sirens grew deafening on his end. I could hear a woman crying hysterically in the background. It sounded exactly like his beautiful new bride Serena, an internet influencer who truly thought she had secured a billionaire lifestyle. "Audrey, please." Bradley begged, his usual arrogance completely stripped away. "My parents put their house up as collateral for my business loans. If the company goes under tonight, the bank will take their home. I am standing here in my tuxedo, and there are federal agents waiting by the valet stand. You have to undo this. We were together for 11 years. I set my coffee cup down on the saucer with a soft clink. "Your mother told me I was too rigid and boring to be part of your family. Serena texted me that winners take all and losers cry. So I suggest you go comfort your new wife, Bradley. I am hanging up now." I ended the call, blocked his number, and took a deep breath of the fresh mountain air. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever experienced. But to truly understand the sheer terror in Bradley's voice, and to know exactly how his dream wedding in the Hamptons turned into an absolute crime scene, we have to rewind the clock. We need to go back exactly 12 hours to see the disaster unfold from the very beginning. And lucky for me, my former brother-in-law, Jamal, a brilliant corporate lawyer who saw right through Bradley, was secretly broadcasting every glorious moment of his downfall directly to my phone. 12 hours earlier, I was sitting on the balcony of my hotel suite, wrapped in a plush robe, with a glass of Barolo wine in my hand. The clock read just past midnight in Italy, which meant the evening reception was in full swing back in New York. My phone screen illuminated the darkness, displaying a crystal-clear video feed. On the other end was Jamal, my former brother-in-law. Jamal is 34 years old, a brilliant corporate lawyer, and the only person in Bradley's family who possessed a functioning moral compass. As a black man navigating the cutthroat world of corporate law, Jamal had zero patience for frauds, which was exactly why he and I had always gotten along so well. He was married to Bradley's younger sister, Rebecca, but his loyalty tonight was entirely mine. I watched Jamal seamlessly angle his phone from his chest pocket to capture the extravagant Hamptons estate Bradley had rented. It was a grotesque display of new money desperation. There were towering floral arrangements that cost more than a luxury car, ice sculptures shaped like swans, and waiters carrying trays of imported caviar. "Are you seeing this disaster?" Jamal whispered, his deep voice barely audible over the string quartet playing in the background. "He actually paid for the swans, Audrey. He is walking around telling the investors he paid for this whole thing in cash from his latest funding round." I took a sip of my wine and smiled at the screen. "Let him play billionaire for the night," I replied softly. Jamal snorted quietly. "The man is currently giving a lecture to a group of venture capitalists about how he single-handedly coded the financial algorithm from scratch in a garage. He just told a guy from Goldman Sachs that he was a self-taught genius." Audrey, the man asked me last month how to convert a Word document into a PDF file. I laughed out loud. That was exactly the narrative Bradley had been selling for the last year. He was the charming visionary face of the company, the guy who could sell ice to a polar bear. But behind closed doors, he was functionally illiterate when it came to the actual product. He had spent years riding my coattails, taking the credit for the risk assessment software I spent thousands of hours building from the ground up. I did the math, built the infrastructure, and secured the patents. He just wore expensive suits and smiled for the cameras. Jamal shifted his position near the open bar, turning the camera toward the center of the manicured lawn. "The bride has arrived," he muttered. "Brace yourself." The screen filled with the image of Serena. She was 27, glowing with the aggressive confidence of someone who believed they had just won the lottery. She was parading around the venue in a custom Vera Wang gown that easily cost $50,000. But instead of greeting her guests, she was holding her own phone out on a selfie stick, loudly live-streaming the reception to her hundreds of thousands of followers. "She is telling her fans that this is what happens when you upgrade a man's life," Jamal whispered, shaking his head in disgust. "She genuinely thinks he is a tech mogul. She has no idea the entire operation is held together by your intellectual property and a mountain of unsecured debt." I watched Serena throw her head back and laugh at something Bradley said, her diamond necklace catching the light. She looked radiant, triumphant, and entirely oblivious to the trap she had just walked into. When Bradley filed for divorce and demanded I hand over the business, Serena had gleefully messaged me from his phone, telling me to step aside because I was holding him back. She wanted the billionaire lifestyle, and she thought I was the only thing standing in her way. The string quartet suddenly stopped playing. The aggressive clinking of a spoon against a champagne flute echoed through the speakers. Jamal adjusted his phone as Bradley and Serena stepped up to a raised platform covered in white roses. It was time for the toasts, but Serena waved off the best man. She grabbed the microphone with a manicured hand, her eyes scanning the crowd of wealthy investors and family members. "Thank you all for being here to witness real love," Serena announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "When I met Bradley, he was stuck in a rut. He had the brilliance, but he was trapped in a dead-end marriage with a woman who just could not understand his vision. Jamal inhaled sharply through his teeth. I gripped my wine glass tighter, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm. Serena looked directly into the camera of her own live stream, smiling a razor-sharp smile. So I just want to take a moment to raise a glass to the boring ex-wife who lacked the vision to keep a real man. Thank you for walking away quietly. Because of your lack of ambition, I get to stand here tonight as the co-owner of a $50 million empire. A chorus of polite laughter and enthusiastic applause erupted through the phone speaker. Serena practically beamed under the attention, raising her crystal flute in the air as if she had just won an Oscar. I watched as Bradley pulled her in for a dramatic camera-ready kiss, playing the role of the devoted power couple to absolute perfection. Jamal slowly shook his head, shifting his weight near the open bar. Then a new figure stepped onto the platform, aggressively grabbing the microphone from Serena. It was Sylvia, Bradley's mother. Sylvia was a woman who treated zip codes like personality traits. She wore a silver sequined gown that looked entirely too heavy for a summer evening, her hair sprayed into an immaculate, unmoving helmet. For the 11 years I was married to her son, Sylvia had made it her personal mission to remind me that I simply did not fit the aesthetic of her family. "Oh, let me say a few words," Sylvia cooed, her shrill voice echoing across the manicured lawn. "Looking at Serena tonight, I am just overwhelmed with joy. Bradley, you have finally found a woman who understands how to shine by your side. A woman who knows that life is about experiencing the finest things, not just burying your head in the sand." She paused, offering the crowd a practiced, sympathetic sigh. We all know Bradley struggled for years. It is incredibly difficult for a visionary to build a brand when he is chained to someone whose biggest contribution to a conversation is a depressing obsession with spreadsheets and profit margins. I did not flinch as I watched the screen. I vividly remembered the countless family dinners where Sylvia would hand me her empty wine glass without even looking at me, expecting me to fetch refills from the kitchen while they discussed expensive country club memberships. She never once saw me as a true partner to her son. She saw me as the hired help, the boring accountant who balanced their checkbooks, filed their tax extensions, and made sure their credit cards never declined while they played pretend high society. Whenever they planned lavish family vacations, Sylvia would always suggest I stay behind at the hotel to work on my little numbers while they rented yachts. "But look at you now," Sylvia continued, gesturing wildly to the extravagant floral arrangements and the massive ice sculptures. "You have a beautiful wife who belongs on the cover of a magazine, not huddled in a dark home office staring at a computer screen. We finally have a daughter-in-law we can be proud to show off. A woman who brings real value to this family." Jamal, who had been standing just a few feet from the stage, suddenly stepped forward and raised his own glass. His tall, commanding presence immediately drew the attention of the surrounding guests. "A toast to the bride." Jamal called out, his deep voice booming effortlessly over the quiet crowd. "It is truly remarkable, Sylvia, how some people can remain entirely unburdened by the complexities of intellectual property law and corporate liability, yet still manage to enjoy the champagne with such careless abandon. Cheers to blissful ignorance." Sylvia smiled brightly, completely missing the sharp, legally phrased insult hidden in his words. "Exactly, Jamal." Sylvia agreed enthusiastically, raising her glass. "It is all about living in the moment and leaving those boring details in the past." I let out a sharp laugh in my empty hotel room. Jamal subtly tilted his phone down so I could see his wide, knowing grin. He knew exactly what was coming, and he was savoring every single second of their arrogance. Bradley took the microphone back from his mother, wrapping a possessive arm around Serena's waist. He looked out at the sea of wealthy investors and venture capitalists seated at the premium front tables. These were the people he desperately needed to impress tonight, to keep his house of cards from collapsing. "My mother is right," Bradley announced, his chest puffed out with artificial pride. "It takes a specific kind of relentless energy to reach this level of success." When I started this financial tech company, people told me I was dreaming way too big. They told me to play it safe, to stick to the boring numbers, and play by the traditional rules. But I knew the risk assessment software I was building was going to change the financial sector forever. I knew my vision was flawless. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the string quartet fade completely into silence. He wanted every single ear focused entirely on him. And that is why I am absolutely thrilled to announce tonight, surrounded by my beautiful new wife, my incredibly supportive family, and my trusted investors, that as of this morning, our latest private valuation has officially crossed the $50 million mark. The crowd erupted into massive cheers. Several men in expensive tailored suits stood up to applaud, raising their drinks toward the stage. Through the screen, I heard Jamal let out a sharp, incredulous breath. The phone camera shook slightly as Jamal lowered it to his chest, whispering directly into the microphone, so only I could hear the absolute disbelief in his voice. "Audrey," Jamal whispered frantically. Did he really just stand in front of a crowd containing Richard Montgomery and claim this bankrupt shell of a company is worth $50 million? I swirled the dark red wine in my glass, watching the rich liquid coat the sides of the crystal. "Let him dig the hole deeper, Jamal," I replied softly. "He is going to need the extra room for the casket." The applause for Bradley's ridiculous $50 million claim eventually died down, replaced by the heavy thumping bass of the hired DJ. Jamal navigated his way through the sea of congratulatory handshakes, carefully holding his phone at chest level. He followed the trail of white silk and giggling women toward a lavish velvet lounge area near the edge of the dance floor. Serena had collapsed onto a plush sofa, surrounded by 5 bridesmaids dressed in matching blush-pink gowns. She was clutching a fresh bottle of vintage champagne by the neck, her face flushed with alcohol and absolute triumph. Jamal leaned against a nearby marble pillar, casually pretending to text his wife while keeping the camera lens aimed directly at the bridal party. Serena took a messy swig straight from the bottle and passed it to her maid of honor. "You guys," Serena slurred slightly, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Can you believe Audrey just let him go without a fight? She is so stupid. When Bradley told her he wanted a divorce, she just packed her bags and moved to Europe. She did not even try to fight for the company." Her maid of honor gasped, leaning in close. "But wait, did you guys sign a prenup? What if she tries to come back and sue you for half of the $50 million? Serena let out a loud, obnoxious laugh that made me wince through the phone speaker. "Oh, please," she scoffed, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Bradley is a genius." A month before the divorce was even finalized, he quietly transferred 50% of his shares directly into my name. He made me an official co-owner of the entire corporation to protect his assets from that miserable accountant. We signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement this morning. What is mine, and what is his is ours. I am legally completely untouchable. Sitting in my hotel room in Italy, I actually had to cover my mouth to stop myself from laughing out loud. Serena truly thought she had executed the ultimate gold digger masterstroke. But what Serena did not understand, and what Bradley was too arrogant to research, was the fatal flaw in American corporate law when it comes to shared assets in a prenuptial agreement. When you sign a legal document making yourself the 50% co-owner of a corporation, you do not just get a VIP pass to the profits. You immediately assume 50% of the corporate liabilities. Bradley had convinced Serena that transferring the shares was a clever way to hide money from me during our divorce. In reality, I had legally structured the divorce settlement so that I walked away with 0% of the company and 100% of my intellectual property. Bradley kept the empty shell of the business, but he also kept the staggering $20 million in unsecured corporate debt he had secretly accumulated. He had been using company credit lines to fund his affair with Serena, buying her designer bags and leasing penthouses under the guise of corporate expenses. By demanding to be placed on the company charter and aggressively protecting those shares in her ironclad prenup, Serena did not secure a $25 million fortune. She legally co-signed a $10 million financial black hole. Her influencer brand, her future earnings, and every single piece of jewelry she owned were now officially tied to a bankrupt company. She had voluntarily shackled herself to a sinking ship just to spite me. "I am a millionaire, you guys," Serena squealed to her friends, holding her hands up in the air. "Bradley is going to buy me a custom house in Malibu next month. We are untouchable." Jamal shook his head, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. "Untouchable," he whispered into the phone. "She is about to learn what federal financial restitution means." Right at that moment, the heavy mahogany double doors at the entrance of the banquet hall swung open with a violent thud. The sudden movement was so forceful that it caught the attention of the event coordinator, who immediately waved frantically at the DJ booth. The loud pulsing music was abruptly cut off, leaving the massive room in a stunned, echoing silence. Hundreds of guests turned around, champagne glasses frozen mid-air. Standing in the doorway, completely ignoring the bewildered stares of the catering staff, was Richard Montgomery. He was Bradley's biggest angel investor, a ruthless billionaire venture capitalist who was supposed to be in Tokyo on a massive business trip. He was not wearing a tuxedo like the rest of the guests. He was wearing a sharp gray business suit, his expression cold and heavily calculating. And tucked tightly under his right arm was a thick black leather binder. Richard Montgomery stepped fully into the ballroom. His expensive leather shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor, a sound that somehow carried over the dead silence of the room. Bradley immediately plastered on his signature charismatic smile. He clearly thought Richard had flown back from Tokyo early just to surprise him and toast to his new marriage. That was how deep Bradley's narcissism ran. He genuinely believed billionaire investors rearranged their global schedules simply to attend his lavish parties. Bradley handed his champagne glass to Serena and practically jogged across the dance floor. "Richard." "What an absolute honor," Bradley called out, extending both arms as if he were greeting a lifelong friend. "I thought you were stuck in board meetings in Japan." "Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our lead investor, the man who helped make this $50 million valuation possible." A smattering of confused applause broke out among the guests. Bradley gestured frantically to the DJ, signaling for someone to bring Richard a microphone. But Richard did not smile. He did not shake Bradley's outstretched hand. He just stood there, staring at the groom with the dead, unblinking eyes of an apex predator. "Cancel the microphone," Richard said. His voice was not exceptionally loud, but it possessed a heavy, authoritative gravel that commanded absolute attention. He bypassed Bradley completely and walked directly onto the center of the custom monogrammed dance floor. Bradley chuckled nervously, quickly following behind him. "Come on, Richard. Grab a drink. Let us get you a plate. You have to say a few words to the crowd. We were just celebrating the new numbers." Through the phone screen, I saw Jamal slowly back away from the bridal party, giving himself a clear, unobstructed view of the center of the room. "This is it," Jamal whispered into the speaker. "The execution." Richard stopped in the middle of the dance floor and finally turned to face Bradley. He opened the thick black leather binder he had been carrying and pulled out a stack of documents branded with the logo of an independent auditing firm. "Bradley, I am not here to drink your champagne or eat your caviar," Richard said smoothly. "And I certainly have no intention of giving a toast. I am here because of Section 4, Paragraph 12 of our Series B funding agreement. I am sure you remember signing it." The color instantly drained from Bradley's face. His fake smile faltered, replaced by a look of sheer primal panic. In the world of venture capital, everyone knew exactly what Section 4, Paragraph 12 meant. I watched from my hotel room in Italy, completely mesmerized by the flawless execution of this moment. I knew all about that specific clause. In fact, I was the one who had anonymously mailed a copy of Bradley's actual expense reports to Richard's office 3 days ago, effectively pulling the fire alarm. An emergency audit is the corporate equivalent of a drone strike. It gives the lead investor the absolute right to freeze all company operations and initiate an immediate forensic financial review if they suspect gross misconduct. It means external accountants seize laptops, lock out the founders, and scour every single bank statement for criminal activity. For a man who had been using company money to buy his mistress, designer clothes, and luxury cars, An emergency audit was an immediate death sentence. Bradley swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper that Jamal barely caught on camera. "Richard, please not right now. This is my wedding day. My family is here. My new wife is here. We can talk about the quarterly reports on Monday morning in the office. I can explain everything to you then. Let us just keep this between us." But Richard did not lower his voice. He had no intention of keeping this a private conversation. He turned away from Bradley and addressed the massive crowd of 300 wealthy guests, venture capitalists and family members. "I apologize for interrupting the festivities," Richard announced, his voice projecting clearly across the silent banquet hall. "But as the primary financial backer of this company, I have a legal and moral obligation to inform the other investors in this room about the grim reality of their portfolios." Serena stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched the skirt of her expensive gown. "What is he talking about, Bradley?" she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "Tell him to leave right now. This is our private party." Richard ignored her completely. He held up a single sheet of paper from the audit report, ensuring the men from Goldman Sachs and other investment firms in the front row could see the glaring red numbers printed on the page. "I am not here to celebrate a $50 million valuation," Richard declared, his tone cold and absolute. "I am here to inform you that the luxury yacht you booked for your Mediterranean honeymoon next week has officially been repossessed by the bank. Every single corporate credit card has been declined and permanently canceled. Your accounts are completely frozen. Your numbers are entirely fabricated. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, your company is entirely bankrupt." For a few agonizing seconds, no one in the massive banquet hall dared to breathe. The air in the room grew incredibly thick. Then Bradley let out a loud, forced laugh that echoed awkwardly off the crystal chandeliers. "Good one," Richard. Bradley chuckled aggressively, slapping his thigh as if he had just heard a hilarious punchline. "You really almost had them. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Richard Montgomery. He always loved a good roast. Now let us get back to the music and pour the man a drink." Bradley frantically waved his hands at the DJ booth, but the technician remained frozen in place. Richard did not even crack a smile. His expression remained as cold as stone. He simply raised his right hand and snapped his fingers twice in the direction of the audiovisual crew standing near the back of the room. The bright lights in the ballroom suddenly dimmed. A massive high-definition projector mounted to the ceiling whirred to life. Bradley had rented the expensive equipment to play a highly produced 20-minute romantic montage of his relationship with Serena. But when the bright beam of light hit the custom white floral wall behind the stage, there were no pictures of the happy couple walking on the beach. Instead, the wall was illuminated with a towering, perfectly formatted financial spreadsheet. The official logo of Richard's venture capital firm was watermarked in the background. Through the phone screen, I could hear the collective gasp of the venture capitalists sitting in the front row. These were men who spent their entire lives reading financial reports and auditing ledgers. They instantly recognized exactly what they were looking at. "I do not make jokes about my investments," Bradley Richards said coldly, stepping to the side so everyone could clearly see the glaring red numbers. "I make money, and you have been stealing mine." I watched closely as Jamal zoomed the camera in on the projection. As a forensic accountant, I had spent weeks compiling those exact spreadsheets. I knew every single cell by heart. I had meticulously categorized every stolen dollar and mapped out every fake vendor account. Now the entire room was reading my flawless handiwork. "What is this?" Bradley stammered. The fake charismatic smile finally melted completely off his face. "Turn that off right now. You cannot show private company documents at my wedding." "These are not private company documents anymore," Richard replied, his voice booming through the silent room. "They are evidence of federal wire fraud. Let us walk the guests through your brilliant corporate strategy." Richard pulled a small laser pointer from his suit jacket and aimed a bright green dot at the top of the spreadsheet. "Line item 42," Richard announced loudly. A $12,000 corporate expense categorized as server maintenance and data storage. In reality, that money was wired directly to a luxury boutique in Manhattan for a limited edition Hermes Birkin bag. The green dot moved down the massive wall. Line item 89. $45,000 marked as an annual software licensing fee. The actual recipient was the leasing office of a luxury penthouse overlooking Central Park. I could hear the aggressive murmurs spreading quickly through the crowd of investors. Bradley was physically shaking. He tried to step in front of the projector beam to block the numbers with his body, but the spreadsheet was simply too massive. The financial truth was literally plastered all over his expensive white tuxedo jacket. For 2 entire years, Bradley had been systematically draining the company accounts to fund his secret double life. He wanted to play the role of the self-made tech billionaire to impress his young influencer mistress, but he did not actually have the personal wealth to support it. So he stole it. He diverted investor funds, fabricated vendor invoices, and forged expense reports to buy Serena diamond necklaces, first-class flights to Paris, and 5-star hotel suites. He had treated the corporate treasury like his own personal piggy bank, while pretending he was building a legitimate software empire. Serena was standing completely frozen on the stage. The heavy champagne bottle slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor, but nobody even looked her way. Her eyes were locked onto the massive projection illuminating the floral wall. Jamal angled his phone to perfectly capture Serena's face. She was not looking at the total amount of stolen money at the bottom of the page. She was looking closely at the specific dates listed next to each transaction. "Wait a minute," Serena whispered. Her voice was trembling as she pointed a manicured finger at the screen. "That Birkin bag. You gave that to me for my 25th birthday. You told me you bought it with the profits from your personal stock portfolio." She took a slow step closer to the wall, her eyes frantically scanning the long list of luxury purchases. The Central Park penthouse rent, the Cartier watches, the custom diamond engagement ring currently sitting on her left hand. Next to every single extravagant gift she had ever received from him was a corresponding date and a fake corporate expense code. Serena slowly turned to look at her new husband. The absolute horror dawning on her face was a masterpiece to witness. She finally realized the devastating truth. Bradley was not a wealthy tech mogul. Every single ounce of his wealth was stolen company money, and she had just legally signed a document tying herself to his massive corporate debt. The massive spreadsheet continued to glow brightly against the white floral wall, casting a harsh light over the ruined wedding reception. Bradley looked frantically around the room at the angry faces of the venture capitalists who had just realized their investments paid for his luxury lifestyle. He saw Serena backing away from him, her eyes wide with absolute horror. The illusion was completely shattered, but Bradley was a narcissist pushed into a corner. Instead of showing remorse, he immediately pivoted to his only remaining defense mechanism. He puffed out his chest and raised his voice, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Listen to me," Richard Bradley shouted, his voice echoing across the silent dance floor. "So what if I borrowed against the corporate accounts? That is perfectly normal for a founder scaling a startup. You are forgetting the most important asset we have: the core financial algorithm. That software alone is worth tens of millions of dollars. If we have to liquidate, we can just sell the proprietary code to one of our competitors. It will more than cover the $20 million debt and still leave us with a massive profit. We are completely fine." Through the screen of Jamal's phone, I watched Richard slowly close his thick black leather binder. The billionaire investor did not look angry anymore. He just looked at Bradley with a deep, profound pity. "You really are the most arrogant fool I have ever met in my entire career," Richard said, his voice dropping to a low, steady cadence that carried perfectly through the dead quiet room. "You do not have a proprietary algorithm, Bradley. You do not have any intellectual property at all to sell." Bradley froze, his fake smile completely vanishing. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "I built that software. My company owns every single line of that code." Richard reached into the inside pocket of his expensive gray suit jacket and pulled out a single crisp white envelope. "Your company does not own a single line of that code," Richard corrected him. "Your company is nothing but an empty shell corporation that you used to commit credit fraud. The financial risk assessment algorithm you have been parading around to investors is legally owned in its entirety by an independent offshore consulting firm, a firm that is solely owned and operated by your ex-wife Audrey." Sitting in my hotel room in Italy, I took a long, slow sip of my red wine. It was the absolute pinnacle of my forensic accounting career. When Bradley demanded a fast divorce so he could instantly marry Serena, he had been incredibly aggressive about keeping his beloved tech company. He told his lawyers he would not give me a single dime of his future $50 million empire. To get me to walk away quietly, he generously offered to let me keep my tiny, independent consulting business. He called it a worthless side hustle and laughed when I agreed to the terms, without a fight to avoid paying me alimony. But Bradley was so busy planning his extravagant Hamptons wedding that he never bothered to actually read the original patent filings. If he had, he would have seen that my consulting firm was the registered owner and creator of the software. Bradley's tech company only had a temporary commercial license to use it. I had let him borrow my genius while we were married, but the moment the judge signed our divorce decree, the terms of that license completely changed. Richard held the crisp white envelope out toward Bradley. "It is funny how divorce works," Richard noted dryly. "You were so desperate to keep the shiny company that you completely ignored the fine print. Audrey simply leased the software to you. And unfortunately for you, she just terminated the lease." Bradley stared at the white envelope as if it were a venomous snake. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely lift his arms. "What is that?" he whispered. "This is a formal legal notice," Richard announced, turning his head slightly so the entire room of investors and family members could hear the final nail being driven into the coffin. "It is an official cease and desist letter from Audrey's legal team. As of 8 o'clock this morning, your commercial license to use the risk assessment software has been permanently revoked. You no longer have a product. You no longer have an algorithm. You just have $20 million in unsecured debt and a massive paper trail of wire fraud." Jamal zoomed the camera in perfectly on Bradley's face. The groom looked as though all the blood had been instantly drained from his body. "Your $50 million company is now officially worth zero," Richard stated, stepping back and letting the envelope drop directly onto the monogrammed dance floor at Bradley's feet. "Have a wonderful honeymoon." The crisp white envelope lay untouched on the polished marble floor. For a brief moment, the only sound in the massive ballroom was the low hum of the projector fan, which was still displaying the staggering list of fraudulent expenses on the floral wall. Then the dam broke. The quiet shock morphed into a chaotic symphony of frantic whispers and angry shouts. The wealthy venture capitalists in the front row did not wait for an apology or an explanation. They immediately pulled out their cell phones, stepping away from the banquet tables to aggressively dial their own legal teams and crisis management firms. The room was practically vibrating with the energy of a massive financial scandal unfolding in real time. Through the glowing screen of my phone, I watched Bradley stare blankly at the cease and desist letter resting by his feet. His brain simply could not process the fact that his carefully constructed house of cards had just been annihilated. Sylvia, Bradley's mother, finally snapped out of her bewildered trance. She pushed her way past the stunned bridesmaids, her heavy sequined gown swishing aggressively as she marched toward the center of the dance floor. She grabbed her son by the arm, trying to pull him away from Richard's cold glare. Then she turned her frantic eyes toward the velvet lounge area, desperately searching the crowd, until she found the one man she believed could magically fix this unmitigated disaster. "Jamal!" Sylvia shrieked, her shrill voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. "Jamal, get over here right now! You are a lawyer. Do something. Threaten to sue him for defamation. Tell these people this is all a massive misunderstanding. Stop standing there and do your job to protect this family." I smiled into my empty hotel room, For years, Sylvia had treated Jamal with the exact same subtle, condescending disrespect she had directed at me. She only acknowledged his brilliant legal mind when she needed free advice on her taxes or help negotiating a contract for her country club renovations. Because he was married to her daughter, she assumed Jamal would instantly jump to defend the family honor completely regardless of the facts. But Jamal did not rush to the stage. He did not pull out a legal pad or start shouting frantic objections. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch. He lowered his phone slightly, but kept the camera perfectly angled so I could witness every single second of his absolute refusal. "I am afraid I cannot do that," Sylvia, Jamal said smoothly. His deep, commanding voice effortlessly silenced the immediate area around him. "I am a corporate mergers and acquisitions attorney. I do not practice criminal defense." Sylvia gasped, her face turning a bright, blotchy red. "Criminal defense?" she stammered. "What are you talking about? This is just a business dispute. Bradley just needs to sit down and explain the accounting mix-up." "It is not a mix-up," Sylvia, Jamal replied, taking a few steps forward so his voice carried even further. He flashed a brilliant, devastating smile that was completely devoid of any actual warmth. "And since there seems to be some confusion among the bridal party, allow me to translate the legal jargon Mr. Montgomery just presented into plain English." Jamal turned to face the crowd, slipping one hand casually into the pocket of his tailored suit. "Your son did not just borrow money from the company treasury. He committed federal wire fraud. He deliberately falsified vendor invoices and wired investor capital into private accounts to buy designer handbags, luxury cars, and penthouse leases. That is not a business dispute. That is a textbook felony." Bradley finally snapped out of his daze. "Shut up, Jamal!" he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "You are supposed to be my brother. You are supposed to be on my side." "I am on the side of the law," Bradley, Jamal countered flawlessly. "And the law says that when you use interstate wire communications to defraud investors out of $20 million, the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation tend to get very involved. You do not need a family lawyer tonight. You need a bail bondsman." The remaining color drained from Sylvia's face. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. The wealthy guests who had not already fled toward the exits were now staring at Bradley with absolute disgust. He was no longer a visionary tech founder in their eyes. He was just a common thief in a very expensive tuxedo. The camera shifted quickly as Jamal refocused the lens on the bride. Serena had been standing completely silent for the last several minutes, her eyes darting back and forth between the massive financial spreadsheet projected on the wall and the panicked faces of her new in-laws. Her chest was heaving, and her carefully applied makeup was beginning to run as hot tears welled up in her eyes. She slowly turned to face Bradley. Her face was as pale as her $50,000 wedding gown. "Bradley," Serena whispered, her voice trembling so violently it sounded like she was freezing to death. "You told me you were a billionaire. You told me this company was worth $50 million. If the company is bankrupt and the algorithm is gone, what about the prenuptial agreement we signed this morning? What about my half of the company?" Jamal turned his attention to the pale, trembling bride. He took another slow sip of his scotch before answering her. "That is a fantastic question," Serena, Jamal said, with a bright and completely genuine smile. "You see, when you demanded that Bradley transfer 50% of the corporate shares into your name, you became a legal equal partner in the business. You were so worried that Audrey might try to come after his future wealth that you had your own lawyers draft an aggressive, ironclad prenuptial agreement. You made absolutely sure that your half of the company could never be taken away from you." Serena nodded slowly, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. "Yes," she whispered. "I own half of it. It is in writing." "Exactly," Jamal replied, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "But corporate equity is a double-edged sword, Serena. You do not just own half of the imaginary $50 million profits. You legally own half of the actual $20 million unsecured debt. Because you signed that document and officially joined the company charter this morning, you are now personally responsible for $10 million in fraudulent corporate liabilities. I watched Serena stumble backward, as if the floor beneath her had suddenly turned to ice. In her greedy desperation to secure her status as the wife of a billionaire tech mogul, she had completely destroyed her own life. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how the federal authorities would handle her case. They would not care that she was just the oblivious mistress who wanted nice things. They would look at the legal documents she willingly signed. Her lucrative influencer empire was now officially tied to a massive federal crime. The federal government has absolute power when it comes to financial restitution. Every single dollar she earned from her brand sponsorships, every piece of designer clothing she bought with her affiliate links, and every dime sitting in her personal bank accounts would be subject to immediate asset seizure. They would auction off her luxury cars and empty her investment portfolios to pay back the venture capitalists that Bradley had defrauded. "But I am just an influencer," Serena cried out, her voice echoing across the silent dance floor. "I did not steal that money. He gave it to me as gifts. You cannot take my money. My brand deals are mine. I built my platform from nothing. Tell that to the Securities and Exchange Commission," Jamal told her, casually adjusting his perfectly tailored suit jacket. "When the federal government comes to collect $10 million in restitution, they are going to liquidate your entire life. Your brand deals are gone, Serena. Your bank accounts are going to be frozen by Monday morning. You are going to spend the next 20 years doing sponsored posts for Diet Tea just to pay off your legal fees." Bradley stepped forward, holding his hands up in a desperate attempt to calm his new wife. "Serena, sweetheart, please listen to me," he begged, his voice cracking under the pressure. "We can fix this. I will hire the best defense attorneys in the country. We will figure a way out of this together. We are a team, remember." Serena stared at him with a look of absolute unhinged hatred. The glamorous, confident woman who had been bragging about her custom Malibu house just 20 minutes ago was completely gone. She looked at the massive financial spreadsheet still glowing brightly on the wall behind him. She looked at the cease and desist letter resting by his expensive leather shoes. She finally understood that she had thrown away her youth and her entire career for a man who was nothing more than a broke, lying criminal. "You ruined my life!" Serena screamed. The sound tore from her throat with such violent force that it startled the remaining guests in the front row. "You lied to me about everything. You are not a genius. You are just a pathetic thief who lived off your ex-wife." Bradley tried to reach out and grab her shoulders, but Serena violently shoved him away. She spun around wildly, her eyes scanning the lavishly decorated room until they locked onto the massive 5-tier wedding cake positioned near the stage. Resting beside the cake was a long silver cutting knife adorned with white silk ribbons. Serena lunged toward the dessert table, her expensive Vera Wang gown tearing at the seams as she moved. Before anyone could react, she grabbed the heavy silver knife by the handle. Bradley let out a high-pitched yell and stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet in his rush to get away. "I hate you!" Serena shrieked at the top of her lungs. She pulled her arm back and threw the cake knife directly at Bradley's head. The heavy blade spun through the air, missing his face by mere inches. It flew past him and violently shattered a massive crystal champagne tower standing right behind the stage. The deafening crash of breaking glass echoed through the banquet hall like an explosion. Total chaos instantly erupted. The remaining venture capitalists and wealthy guests did not wait for another warning. They scrambled frantically toward the heavy mahogany exit doors, pushing over expensive floral arrangements and knocking down chairs in a desperate stampede to escape the crime scene. The sound of shattering crystal and screaming guests echoed violently across the massive banquet hall. The heavy silver cake knife had missed Bradley by mere inches, but the psychological damage was absolute. Total panic consumed the room. Wealthy venture capitalists and elite socialites shoved past each other, trampling over expensive floral arrangements in a desperate stampede toward the main mahogany exit doors. No one wanted to be in the room when the authorities inevitably arrived to ask questions about a $20 million wire fraud. Through the steady lens of Jamal's phone camera, I watched Bradley slowly pick himself up from the floor. His expensive white tuxedo jacket was stained with spilled champagne, and his perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess. For a brief second, he looked at his new bride. Serena was standing on the stage, weeping hysterically, as her bridesmaids tried to pull her away from the broken glass. He could have gone to her. He could have stood his ground, faced his investors, and tried to protect the woman he had just married hours earlier. But as a forensic accountant who spent over a decade studying his behavior, I knew exactly what Bradley was going to do next. Throughout our entire 11-year marriage, Bradley had never once taken accountability for his own failures. Whenever a business deal fell through, he blamed his partners. Whenever he missed a mortgage payment, he blamed the bank. He was a coward who hid behind my intelligence when things went right and abandoned ship the second things went wrong. Bradley quickly realized the main exit was completely blocked by the frantic crowd of fleeing guests. His eyes darted around the room until he spotted the large swinging doors leading into the catering kitchen. Without a single word to Serena, he turned his back on his brand-new wife and started to run. Jamal immediately moved through the crowd, holding his phone high to track Bradley's cowardly escape path. "Bradley, where are you going?" Sylvia screamed. His mother was standing alone near the center of the dance floor. Her heavy sequined gown was soaked in spilled drinks, and her face was stained with running mascara. She reached her arms out toward her golden child, desperately needing him to tell her that this was all a mistake, and that their family would be fine. But Bradley did not stop. As he sprinted past his mother, Sylvia desperately grabbed his arm to slow him down. Instead of comforting the woman who had spent her entire life shielding him from consequences, Bradley aggressively shoved her away. He pushed his own mother with such violent force that Sylvia stumbled backward, her high heels twisting beneath her as she collapsed heavily into a broken wooden chair. "Did you get that on video, Jamal?" I whispered into my phone. A cold sense of satisfaction washing over me in my Italian hotel room. Every single frame, Jamal replied, his deep voice thick with absolute disgust. Bradley did not even look back to see if his mother was hurt. He crashed through the heavy wooden swinging doors, disappearing into the bright fluorescent lights of the catering kitchen. The camera feed shook slightly as Jamal calmly followed him, pushing through the swinging doors a few seconds later. The massive stainless steel kitchen was in a state of total confusion. Dozens of hired waiters and chefs had stopped cooking, staring in shock at the frantic groom running past their prep stations. Bradley knocked over a tray of expensive appetizers, sending silver platters crashing to the tile floor. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he frantically searched for the rear exit. In his delusional mind, he truly believed he could just slip out the back door, jump into his rented sports car, and drive away from federal felony charges. He spotted the heavy metal delivery doors at the far end of the kitchen. He sprinted toward them, using both hands to violently shove the metal crash bar. The heavy door flew open, letting in a sudden rush of cool Hampton's night air. Bradley stepped out onto the concrete loading dock, fully expecting to disappear into the quiet darkness of the evening. But there was no darkness waiting for him outside. The instant the metal door swung open, the entire loading dock was illuminated by a blinding, chaotic storm of flashing red and blue strobe lights. The deafening chirp of a police siren echoed right outside the building. Bradley froze completely in his tracks, raising a hand to shield his eyes from the harsh glare. Standing at the bottom of the concrete steps, waiting patiently next to a fleet of unmarked black government vehicles, were 6 agents wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI and SEC printed boldly across their chests. The chaotic flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles were the last things I saw on the live stream before Jamal abruptly ended the video call. That was exactly 12 hours ago. Now the sun was shining brightly over Lake Como, and my phone was still pressed against my ear. I had tried to hang up on Bradley earlier, but he immediately called back from a different number. It was the frantic, desperate call of a man sitting in the back of an unmarked government vehicle, watching his entire world collapse. Audrey, please do not hang up on me again, Bradley begged, his voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched whine. I am begging you. The federal agents are letting me make one final call before they confiscate my phone and process my arrest. You have to call your lawyers. You have to tell them to reinstate the commercial license for the software. I picked up my silver spoon and slowly stirred my espresso. I am not calling my lawyers, Bradley, I replied calmly. The intellectual property belongs to my firm. You legally surrendered any claim to it when you demanded a fast divorce. You wanted to be a tech CEO so badly. Now you get to deal with the consequences of running a tech company with no actual tech. You do not understand. Bradley sobbed. The sound of a heavy car door slamming echoed through the speaker, followed by the muffled voice of a federal agent telling him to wrap it up. I did not just ruin my own life, Audrey. It is my parents'. You have to save my parents. I stopped stirring my coffee. Your parents. I repeated, my tone completely flat. What do your parents have to do with your wire fraud charges? Bradley let out a ragged, desperate breath. When I took out the massive commercial loans to inflate the company valuation, the banks required collateral. He confessed, his words tumbling out in a panicked rush. The business was not generating enough actual revenue to secure $20 million in credit. So I asked my parents for help. They co-signed the loans, Audrey. They put their entire estate up as collateral. The house, the cars, the investment portfolios, everything they own is legally tied to the survival of my company. I leaned back in my chair, letting the cool Italian breeze brush against my face. The sheer magnitude of his financial incompetence was staggering. In his desperate need to play the role of a self-made billionaire, he had essentially gambled away his parents' entire life savings. And his parents, blinded by their obsessive need to boast about their golden child at the country club, had eagerly signed the paperwork without ever auditing his business model. If you do not sign the patents back over to the company, the business will be officially liquidated by Monday morning, Bradley cried. The bank will immediately call in the debt. They will foreclose on my parents' estate. My mother and father will be completely bankrupt. They will be thrown out on the street. They have absolutely nowhere else to go. You cannot do this to them, Audrey. I know I was a terrible husband to you, but my parents do not deserve to be homeless. You have to fix this for them. He was using his favorite tactic, emotional manipulation. For 11 years he had relied on my empathy to clean up his messes. He expected me to feel guilty. He expected me to fold under the pressure of ruining an elderly couple's life. But I was no longer the obedient, quiet wife who lived to serve his family. I took a slow sip of my espresso, savoring the rich, dark flavor. Your parents are adults, Bradley, I said smoothly. They made a financial investment in a fraudulent company. The market is simply correcting their poor investment strategy. Audrey, they are family, Bradley screamed, his voice filled with hysterical panic. You cannot just let the bank take their home. I looked out at the peaceful, shimmering water of the lake. I remembered all the holidays I had spent inside that massive colonial mansion. I remembered the perfectly manicured lawns and the expensive crystal chandeliers. I also remembered exactly how I was treated inside those walls. You mean the massive house where your mother told me I was too poor to sit at the main dining table for Thanksgiving? I asked, my voice dropping to a freezing, unyielding whisper. The same house where she made me eat in the kitchen with the catering staff, because my dress was not designer, and she claimed I ruined the aesthetic of her holiday photographs. She spent a decade making sure I knew I was nothing but a peasant, temporarily allowed to exist in her castle. Bradley went completely silent on the other end of the line. Let the bank have it, I told him, and I hung up the phone for good. My phone vibrated violently against the marble table less than 10 seconds after I ended the call. The screen flashed with Jamal's name. Assuming my former brother-in-law was calling to give me a final update on the police raid, I casually swiped to answer. But it was not the deep, calm voice of Jamal greeting me. It was Bradley. He had clearly snatched the phone from Jamal in a blind panic. You set me up, Bradley hissed through the speaker. His tone had rapidly shifted from desperate sobbing to aggressive rage. He was falling back into his favorite role as the ultimate victim. You planned this entire humiliation just to destroy me because you were jealous of Serena. You knew I was finally happy, and you framed me for wire fraud to ruin my life. I did not frame you, Bradley, I replied, my voice cutting through his pathetic delusion like a scalpel. I just audited you. You seem to forget what I do for a living. I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in jealousy. I deal in ledgers. And your ledgers were an absolute masterpiece of criminal stupidity. He tried to interrupt, but I did not let him speak. I unleashed the rapid-fire data I had memorized over the last 6 months. On October 12th, 2 years ago, you told me you were at a tech conference in Austin. You were actually at the Four Seasons in Miami in room 412. You spent $2,000 on room service and another $5,000 at the hotel jewelry store. You used the corporate credit card ending in 4401 and categorized it as a client retention dinner. Bradley went completely silent on the other end of the line. On February 9th, you screamed at me for 3 hours. I continued, my voice steady and cold. You called me crazy and paranoid when I asked why you smelled like expensive perfume. You actually suggested I seek psychiatric help for my trust issues. The very next morning, you wired $12,000 from the company operating account to a Shell LLC registered under Serena's mother's maiden name. You marked it in the general ledger as freelance marketing consultation. I listened to his ragged breathing. I wanted him to feel the full weight of my intelligence. You told me I was losing my mind, Bradley. You looked me dead in the eyes and told me my anxiety was destroying our marriage. You made me feel like I was entirely inadequate. But while you were busy playing the gaslighting husband, I was busy pulling the metadata from your hidden offshore accounts. I tracked every single penny you stole to buy the affection of a 27-year-old influencer. I know about the secret account in the Cayman Islands. I know about the fake vendor invoices you created using the names of our dead pets. I tracked the down payment for the luxury car you bought Serena disguised as a corporate fleet vehicle. I paused to let the devastating reality wash over him. I did not set you up, Bradley. I did not force you to commit federal crimes. You left a financial trail so incredibly sloppy that a first-year accounting student could have sent you to federal prison. I simply gathered your mess into a perfectly formatted spreadsheet and let the consequences catch up to you. The anger completely evaporated from his voice. The aggressive narcissist was gone, replaced once again by a terrified little boy who finally realized he was trapped. He realized I held all the cards and that I was the only person smart enough to save him. Audrey, please, he whispered, his voice trembling so violently I could barely understand him. I made a massive mistake. I was stupid and blind. Serena means absolutely nothing to me. She is just a greedy child who used me for my money. You are the only woman who ever actually understood me. You are the brains behind everything I ever accomplished. I looked out at the peaceful Italian lake, feeling absolutely nothing for the man I once loved. If you call Richard Montgomery and get the charges dropped, I will fix everything. Bradley begged, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. I will annul the marriage right now. I will divorce Serena tonight and leave her with nothing. I will sign whatever you want me to sign. We can rebuild the company together. Just please, Audrey, please. Take me back. Take me back, and I will be the husband you always wanted. I let a long, heavy silence stretch over the phone line. The sheer audacity of his request was almost difficult to process. Less than 12 hours ago, he was standing on a stage covered in white roses, publicly kissing another woman and mocking my lack of ambition. Now he was offering to throw his brand new bride into the trash without a second thought, just to save his own skin. You are wearing your wedding tuxedo, Bradley, I said, my voice perfectly calm. You just stood in front of 300 people and vowed to love and cherish Serena for the rest of your life. You told the world she was the only woman who truly understood your visionary genius. She is a gold digger. Bradley spat, his voice dripping with absolute venom. The desperation was making him reckless. I never actually loved her, Audrey. She was just a distraction. A stupid, superficial girl who only cared about expensive handbags and luxury penthouses. I only married her because she threatened to leave me if I did not put her on the company charter. She is a parasite. You are the only woman I ever respected. I raised an eyebrow even though he could not see me. And what about your parents? I asked, pushing him exactly where I wanted him to go. For 11 years you told me I was the villain for setting boundaries with your mother. You told me family was the most important thing in the world. 10 minutes ago you were crying about them losing their house. They deserve to lose it, Bradley hissed. He was breathing heavily, completely unhinged by the pressure of his impending federal charges. My mother is a greedy leech. She is the one who pushed me to buy the swans and the caviar for the wedding. She spent my entire life demanding that I provide her with a luxury lifestyle she could brag about at her stupid country club. She and my father drained me dry. They are the reason I had to borrow so much money in the first place. I do not care if they end up living on the street. I only care about us, Audrey. If you just sign the patents back over, we can leave all of them behind. I listened to the absolute poison pouring from his mouth. This was the true Bradley. This was the man who had gaslit me for a decade, always playing the victim, always blaming someone else for his own toxic behavior. When he was caught cheating, it was my fault for being too focused on my career. When his business failed, it was his investors' fault for not understanding his vision. Now that he was facing federal prison, his beloved mother was a leech, and his beautiful new wife was a parasite. He was willing to sacrifice every single person in his life if it meant he could escape the consequences of his own actions. I took a deep breath, savoring the cool Italian breeze. Say that again, Bradley? I told him, my tone completely flat. What he asked sounding confused. I said, repeat what you just told me, I commanded, my voice hardening. I need to make sure I am hearing you correctly. I need to know exactly how you feel about your new wife and your mother, before I even consider calling my lawyers. Bradley did not hesitate for a single second. I said Serena is a gold-digging parasite, and my mother is a greedy leech, he practically yelled into the receiver. I never loved Serena. I never respected my family. They are all just dead weight. You and I are the only ones who matter, Audrey. Just please tell me you will help me. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I looked out at the peaceful water of Lake Como and let out a soft, contented sigh. I hope you spoke clearly, Bradley, I said, my voice echoing cleanly through the connection. Jamal, did they hear that? There was a brief rustling sound over the line as the phone was abruptly pulled away from Bradley's face. Then Jamal's deep, smooth voice came through the speaker. Loud and clear, Audrey Jamal replied. Bradley had been so blindly panicked when he snatched the phone that he completely forgot where he was standing. He had forgotten that he was standing squarely in the center of the police precinct lobby, waiting to be formally booked. And he had completely failed to notice that Jamal had purposely gathered Serena Sylvia and his father in a tight circle right behind him just to hear every single word he said. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted for exactly 1 second before the absolute explosion of violence erupted. I heard the sharp, unmistakable crack of a hand striking a face with such tremendous force that it echoed loudly through the entire precinct lobby. Bradley let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp of pain. You called me a parasite, Serena shrieked. Her voice was completely unrecognizable, stripped of all its carefully cultivated influencer sweetness. I gave you the best years of my life. I tied my entire brand to you. And you were going to throw me away like garbage just to save yourself. Another loud, violent smack rang out over the speaker. Bradley started stuttering, frantically trying to backpedal. Serena, wait, please, he pleaded, his voice trembling. I did not mean it. Audrey tricked me into saying that. She is trying to turn us against each other. But nobody was buying his lies anymore. Before Serena could hit him a third time, Sylvia's shrill voice pierced through the background chaos. She sounded like a woman who had just watched her entire reality shatter into a million pieces. A greedy leech, Sylvia screamed, her words choking on her own tears. I gave you everything, Bradley. I spent my entire life defending you. I mortgaged my beautiful home to fund your ridiculous delusions of grandeur. You ungrateful, selfish little monster. You blamed me for your crimes. Through the phone, I could hear the chaotic scuffle of chairs scraping aggressively against the linoleum floor. The stern, heavy voices of federal agents commanded everyone to step back and separate. Bradley was crying openly now, begging his mother and his wife to listen to him, but they were screaming over him with absolute venom. The family unit that had spent a decade treating me like an unwanted outsider was completely tearing itself apart. Jamal's voice suddenly returned to the receiver, sounding incredibly calm and professional. He had clearly walked several feet away from the physical altercation to speak to me without the background noise drowning him out. "Audrey, I really wish you could see this in person," Jamal said, a low, dark chuckle escaping his throat. "Serena just tried to assault him with her custom bridal bouquet, and your former mother-in-law looks like she is about to faint into the arms of a federal marshal." "They deserve each other," I replied, taking a slow, relaxed sip of my espresso. The Italian sun felt incredibly warm against my skin, a perfect contrast to the cold, sterile nightmare they were currently experiencing. "How is Sylvia handling the reality of her impending homelessness and absolute social ruin?" "Oh, she tried her absolute best to avoid it," Jamal explained, his tone thick with deep satisfaction. "About 20 minutes ago, before you called, Sylvia actually cornered the lead investigator in the hallway. She tried to convince the authorities that Bradley was simply too incompetent to pull off a $20 million corporate fraud on his own. She pointed a finger directly at me and told the federal agents that I was the criminal mastermind who structured all the shell companies. She claimed that since I was the family lawyer, I must have orchestrated the entire scheme to steal investor capital." I let out a sharp laugh. "Of course she did," I said. "She would eagerly throw an innocent man into federal prison just to protect her precious golden boy." "Too bad for her. I anticipated this exact scenario the moment I saw the first fake invoice," Jamal said smoothly. "The minute Richard Montgomery dropped that cease and desist letter at the reception, I hit send on an email to the FBI task force. I handed them my entire encrypted legal archive. I provided every single clean contract I ever drafted, proving my complete lack of involvement. But more importantly, I handed them a beautifully documented paper trail showing exactly how Bradley forged my notary stamp and my signature on the fraudulent loan applications." Jamal paused, letting the weight of his brilliant legal maneuver sink in. When Sylvia tried to pin the blame on me, the federal agent literally laughed in her face. He informed her that her son was not just facing wire fraud. He is now facing aggravated identity theft and forgery charges. Sylvia practically collapsed when she realized she had just made things infinitely worse. The background noise on the call suddenly spiked. I heard the heavy, frantic footsteps of someone running fast across the precinct floor directly toward Jamal. "Give me that phone," Serena screamed, her voice breathless and wild. There was a brief, chaotic struggle over the line. I heard the sound of expensive fabric tearing, and Jamal letting out a surprised grunt as someone physically collided with him. "Serena, back off right now," Jamal warned sternly, but it was entirely too late. The phone fumbled loudly before Serena's tearful, gasping voice filled my ear. All the arrogance of the glamorous bride who had mocked my ambition on a live stream just hours ago was completely eradicated. She realized that Bradley was useless and Sylvia was broke. She realized I was the only person who held the actual power. "Audrey, please," Serena begged, her voice cracking into a loud, desperate sob. "I am so sorry. I did not know anything about the stolen money, I swear to you. I will do whatever you want. I will publicly apologize. Just please tell the lawyers not to take my money. Have mercy on me." I listened to the sound of Serena hyperventilating through the phone. It was a sharp contrast to the gentle lapping of the lake water against the stone wall right in front of me. She was gasping for air, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic, incoherent mess of apologies and excuses. The woman who had spent the last 2 years parading around New York in designer clothes, bought with stolen money, was now begging for her life. "Audrey, please, you have to tell Richard Montgomery to leave my bank accounts alone," Serena pleaded, her voice echoing loudly in the police station. "You have the power to stop this. My manager just texted me while we were in the lobby. The influencer agency is completely terminating my contract. My phone has not stopped buzzing since we left the reception. The luxury cosmetics brand, the fitness apparel company, the diet supplement sponsors, they are all dropping me. She let out a loud, pathetic wail that forced me to hold the phone slightly away from my ear. They all saw the live stream, Audrey, she cried out. My followers were screen recording the entire thing. The video of Richard pulling out that spreadsheet is already trending on every social media platform. The whole internet knows the company is bankrupt. If the federal agent sees my personal accounts, I will have absolutely nothing. I cannot pay rent. I cannot buy food. I am completely ruined. I took another sip of my espresso. It was the ultimate poetic justice. Serena had been so obsessed with proving her victory to the world, so desperate to broadcast her lavish lifestyle to her followers, that she had essentially live-streamed her own federal indictment. That sounds like a very difficult situation for you, Serena, I replied, keeping my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. But I am an accountant, not a magician. I cannot magically erase your signature from a legally binding prenuptial agreement. You demanded equity in a fraudulent company. The government is just collecting the bill. But Bradley lied to both of us. Serena argued, suddenly trying to pivot her strategy. She was actually trying to manufacture a sense of female solidarity, as if we were suddenly teammates. We are both victims of his manipulation, Audrey. He used you for your brains, and he used me for my image. You have millions of dollars now from the algorithm patent. You can afford the best defense attorneys in the country. I just need you to wire me enough money to cover a legal retainer so I do not go to prison. Please, Audrey, help me fight him. We can take him down together. I actually closed my eyes and let out a long, quiet breath. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her request was almost impressive. She had actively participated in the destruction of my marriage, mocked me in public, and spent my stolen money. But the second the ship started sinking, she wanted me to throw her a life raft paid for with my own hard-earned wealth. I set my coffee cup down on the table. Serena, I am going to stop you right there, I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, absolute deadpan. Do not ever make the mistake of comparing us. We are not teammates. We are not both victims. I audited my husband and completely legally dismantled his fake empire. You blindly signed a contract because you were too greedy to read the fine print. She started to sob again, but I cut her off immediately. 3 months ago, on the exact day my divorce from Bradley was finalized, you sent me a text message from his phone, I reminded her. Do you remember what you wrote to me while I was packing my bags to move across the world? Serena went completely silent. The only sound coming through the speaker was her ragged, terrified breathing. You told me to step aside because I was too boring to keep a real man, I recited, remembering the exact words she had used to twist the knife. You told me that I was a pathetic failure who did not understand how the real world worked. And then you typed 5 specific words that I have thought about every single day since I arrived in Italy. You typed, "Winners take all, losers cry." Audrey, please, I was just trying to protect my relationship. Serena whispered, her voice cracking with sheer terror. I did not mean it. You meant every single syllable, I told her coldly. You wanted to take it all, Serena. You wanted the billionaire title. You wanted the massive house, and the designer bags, and the social status. Well, you took it. You took the CEO, and you took his company. You are the winner. I looked out at the beautiful Italian scenery, feeling a profound, absolute sense of peace settle over my entire body. I am not crying, Serena, I said firmly. Enjoy the debt. I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. I turned my personal phone completely off and set it face down on the marble table. The silence of the Italian morning wrapped around me like a warm blanket. For the first time in 11 years, I did not have to listen to Bradley's excuses, Sylvia's condescending remarks, or Serena's delusions. I just sat there listening to the gentle lapping of the water against the stone wall. Then a second phone began to ring. It was not my personal device. It was a sleek black encrypted cell phone resting inside my leather work bag. I pulled it out and looked at the caller ID. It was a secure line from New York. I swiped the screen to answer. "Good morning, Audrey," Richard Montgomery said. His heavy, gravelly voice was completely calm and devoid of the aggressive theatricality he had just displayed in the Hamptons ballroom. The operation was a complete success. The authorities have the suspect in custody, and the financial assets are currently being secured by the federal task force. I smiled, picking up my espresso cup. "Excellent work, Richard," I replied smoothly. "I assume the presentation of the spreadsheet went exactly as planned." "It was flawless." Richard chuckled softly, a rare sound from the ruthless billionaire. "He actually tried to tell me the algorithm was worth tens of millions of dollars. The look on his face when I handed him your cease and desist letter was worth every single penny I lost on that initial funding round." This was the massive hidden reality that Bradley and his entire toxic family simply could not comprehend. Richard Montgomery did not just magically stumble upon the wire fraud. Billionaire venture capitalists manage dozens of companies. They rarely look at individual expense reports unless someone points a massive red arrow directly at the discrepancies. 4 months ago, when I first discovered the hotel receipt from Miami and realized Bradley was using corporate funds to finance his affair with Serena, I did not confront him. I did not throw his clothes out on the lawn or cry on the bathroom floor. I went into my home office, locked the door, and looked at his business structure. I realized that destroying him in a divorce court would only get me half of a sinking ship. I wanted to burn the entire ship to the waterline. So I looked up the man who had the most to lose, Richard Montgomery. I quietly compiled a 10-page dossier highlighting the glaring anomalies in Bradley's latest quarterly reports. I did not include my name or my relationship to the founder. I simply sent the anonymous file directly to the private email address of Richard's head of security, along with my resume under my maiden name and a brief cover letter applying for a senior position in their risk management department. Richard called me in for an interview the very next morning. When I sat down in his massive Manhattan office, I handed him the rest of the puzzle. I showed him the offshore accounts and the fake vendor invoices. I proved to him that his golden boy tech founder was stealing his capital. Richard was furious, but he was also incredibly impressed by my absolute lack of mercy and my flawless accounting skills. He hired me on the spot. He gave me a massive 6-figure signing bonus, top-tier corporate security clearance, and total access to his venture capital firm's internal servers. My very first official assignment as the newly appointed lead forensic auditor for Montgomery Capital was to conduct a covert comprehensive investigation into my own husband's company. For the last 3 months of my marriage, while Bradley thought I was just a boring housewife, sitting quietly at home, I was actually his lead investor's corporate executioner. Every time he went out on a date with Serena, I was logging into his company's servers with executive privileges, legally archiving his financial crimes for the federal government. "You did an outstanding job," Audrey, Richard told me over the secure line. "The federal agents were incredibly grateful for the neatly categorized ledgers you provided. They said it is the most open and shut case of wire fraud they have seen in a decade. We will be able to recover a significant portion of the stolen funds through the seizure of his assets and his new wife's accounts." "I am glad to hear it," Richard, I replied. "The numbers never lie." "Take the rest of the week off," he insisted. "Enjoy Italy. When you get back, we have 2 more tech startups in the portfolio that need your special kind of scrutiny. You have officially become my favorite employee." I thanked him and ended the call. I looked out over the beautiful lake, savoring the absolute perfection of my reality. I did not just survive my husband's betrayal. I did not just walk away from his toxic family. I legally orchestrated my own revenge, dismantled his entire fraudulent life, and got paid a massive corporate salary by a billionaire investor to do it. 6 weeks passed since the disastrous wedding reception in the Hamptons. I had officially moved out of my temporary hotel room and purchased a beautiful stone villa nestled in the rolling hills of Tuscany. The massive signing bonus I received from Richard Montgomery easily covered the closing costs in cash. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting on my private terrace reviewing a new portfolio for the venture capital firm when my secure phone began to vibrate. It was Jamal. I answered the call expecting a standard update on the federal indictment, but I could immediately hear the deep amusement in my former brother-in-law's voice. "Good evening from New York, Audrey," Jamal said with a dark chuckle. "I hope you are drinking something expensive because I have a story that is going to make your wine taste absolutely incredible." I set my tablet down and gave him my full attention. "Tell me everything," I replied. Jamal took a breath and began to lay out the ultimate act of desperation. As we both knew, Bradley's parents were facing immediate foreclosure. The bank had seized their investment accounts and was aggressively moving to take their sprawling colonial mansion. Sylvia was absolutely terrified of losing her country club status and being forced to move into a tiny apartment. So instead of accepting reality, she and her husband found a sleazy, desperate attorney willing to work on contingency and filed a massive civil lawsuit directly against me. "They tried to sue you for intellectual property theft," Jamal explained, his voice echoing with disbelief. "Sylvia submitted a formal complaint, claiming that you maliciously stole the algorithm from the marital estate during the divorce. She actually told the court that the software rightfully belonged to Bradley's company and that you manipulated the legal paperwork to bankrupt her family on purpose. They filed for an emergency injunction to freeze your bank accounts and force you to hand the patent back over to the company so the bank would not take their house." I let out a soft laugh. "That is incredibly bold," I noted. "I assume I did not miss much by skipping the hearing." "You did not miss a single thing," Jamal assured me. "Because you are my favorite client, I personally represented you in civil court this morning. You did not even need to be on the same continent." Jamal painted the picture of the courtroom perfectly. He said Sylvia showed up wearing a modest black dress she probably bought specifically for the occasion, trying to play the role of the frail, weeping victim. Her attorney spent 20 minutes giving a passionate speech to the judge about family legacy and corporate sabotage. He tried to argue that I was a bitter ex-wife who had orchestrated a massive financial heist. I just sat there at the defense table and let them talk, Jamal told me, his tone thick with satisfaction. I let them build this massive emotional narrative. And when the judge finally turned to me and asked for our defense, I simply stood up and handed him a single piece of paper. It was the original notarized divorce settlement, the exact document Bradley had aggressively rushed through the court system 3 months ago because he was so desperate to marry Serena. I pointed the judge directly to Section 4 of the Asset Division, Jamal said smoothly. I showed him Bradley's signature directly beneath the clause where he formally acknowledged that your consulting firm retained 100% exclusive ownership of the risk assessment algorithm. I also handed the judge the commercial lease agreement, proving that Bradley was simply a temporary tenant of your intellectual property. I looked out over the Tuscan vineyards, feeling a profound sense of peace. "How did the judge react to the paperwork?" I asked. Jamal laughed out loud. "He was absolutely furious, Audrey. Judges do not like it when people use their courtrooms to throw desperate tantrums." The judge looked at Sylvia's lawyer and asked him if he had even bothered to read the divorce decree before filing the lawsuit. The lawyer started stuttering, and Sylvia started crying real tears this time. The judge slammed his gavel and dismissed the entire case with prejudice in less than 5 minutes. He called it the most frivolous waste of judicial resources he had seen all year. "That is a wonderful outcome, Jamal," I said softly. "Oh, it gets better," Jamal replied, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "I did not just ask for a dismissal, Audrey. When people file frivolous lawsuits against my clients, I always file a countersuit for legal fees. I am a senior partner at a top-tier corporate law firm. My hourly rate is not cheap, and I spent 20 hours preparing for this ridiculous hearing." I sat up slightly in my chair. "What did the judge do?" I asked. "The judge completely agreed with me," Jamal stated firmly. "He not only threw out their lawsuit, but he ordered Bradley's parents to pay my firm's entire legal bill as a penalty for wasting the court's time. They were already on the verge of losing their house to the bank. Now they owe my law firm $50,000 payable immediately. Sylvia literally collapsed into her chair when she heard the ruling. Their desperate attempt to steal your money was the exact thing that just officially bankrupted them completely. Following the hilarious news of the bankruptcy of Bradley's parents, Jamal told me to open my laptop and check my social media feeds. He promised me the entertainment was far from over. I sat back on my sunlit Italian terrace and pulled up the most popular video sharing platform. Serena was making her final desperate play for public sympathy, and it was a masterclass in calculated influencer manipulation. The thumbnail of the video showed Serena sitting on the bare hardwood floor of what looked like an empty, affordable apartment. She had completely stripped away her glamorous aesthetic. She wore absolutely no makeup. Her blonde hair was tied in a messy, unwashed knot, and she was drowning in an oversized, faded gray hoodie. The caption simply read, "My truth." I clicked play and watched her stare directly into the camera, with wide, heavily manufactured tears welling up in her eyes. For 10 agonizing minutes, Serena delivered a deeply rehearsed monologue about surviving severe financial abuse. She cried about being a naive, trusting 27-year-old girl who fell in love with the wrong man. She claimed Bradley had completely controlled her entire life, aggressively hiding his financial records and lying to her daily about the true source of his massive wealth. She painted herself as the ultimate helpless victim, a poor, innocent content creator who was now facing absolute ruin simply because she loved a cruel, manipulative husband. At the very end of the video, she posted a link to a GoFundMe page. She begged her followers to help her raise $500,000 to pay for her legal defense and keep her out of federal prison. For exactly 3 hours, the internet actually believed her. Her loyal fans flooded the comments with words of support. Teenagers started donating their allowance money, and the crowdfunding campaign rapidly climbed past $50,000. But Serena severely underestimated the absolute ruthless efficiency of a corporate lawyer who despised liars. Jamal did not even need to use his own name to destroy her narrative. He simply created an anonymous burner account on a major social media platform and dropped a single devastating file directly into the replies of Serena's biggest offenders. It was a massive PDF containing unsealed federal court documents and official tax records. The leaked documents completely obliterated her naive victim routine. They proved with absolute certainty that Serena was not just blindly accepting expensive gifts from her rich boyfriend. When Bradley bought her a $70,000 sports car, using stolen investor funds, Serena had personally signed the federal tax forms categorizing the vehicle as a corporate marketing expense for his tech company. When they went on luxury vacations to Paris, Serena's signature was on the documents registering the trips as corporate team-building retreats to avoid paying income tax. Jamal even included screenshots of emails where Serena explicitly asked Bradley which fake vendor name she should use to hide the purchase of her new Cartier bracelets. She was a fully willing, legally documented participant in the tax fraud. The internet pivoted with terrifying, brutal speed. Major online drama channels picked up the leaked tax documents within minutes. They broadcasted side-by-side comparisons of her crying apology video and the official federal filings bearing her distinct looping signature. The backlash was absolute and completely unforgiving. Her comment section instantly transformed from supportive fans into hundreds of thousands of angry people demanding their GoFundMe donations back, calling her a scam artist and a federal criminal. By midnight, the crowdfunding platform permanently suspended her campaign for actively violating their terms of service regarding criminal investigations. Every single donated dollar was automatically refunded to the senders. Serena was officially left with absolutely nothing. She had no sponsors, no defense fund, and a permanently ruined public image. She had tried to manipulate the public the exact same way Bradley had manipulated his investors, and the public completely rejected her. I thought that pathetic apology video would be the last time I ever saw Serena's face on my screen. But the internet is an incredibly relentless place. A few weeks later, another short video of Serena went massively viral. But she was not crying on a bare floor this time. A teenager had secretly recorded her at a busy suburban shopping mall in New Jersey. The woman who once bragged about building custom Malibu mansions in her $50,000 Vera Wang wedding gown was now standing behind a cheap wooden podium. She was wearing a stiff, unflattering polyester uniform, with a plastic name tag pinned to her chest, clutching a massive stack of sticky laminated menus. She was working as a hostess at a loud mid-tier chain restaurant, aggressively seating noisy families in booths just to chip away at her massive, court-ordered federal restitution. While Serena was busy seating tables for minimum wage, the final domino in Bradley's fraudulent empire was falling back in New York. The bank officially foreclosed on his parents' sprawling colonial mansion. I did not have to imagine the scene, because Jamal graciously provided me with a detailed play-by-play. On a crisp Tuesday morning, federal marshals and bank representatives arrived at the property to enforce the eviction notice. Sylvia and her husband were forced to stand on their perfectly manicured lawn while a crew of movers began boxing up the expensive crystal chandeliers and custom furniture they no longer owned. The absolute worst part for Sylvia was not losing the house itself. It was the audience. Her wealthy neighbors, the exact same country club socialites she had spent decades trying to impress, were standing at the end of their driveways, watching the entire humiliating spectacle. She was officially stripped of her elite status and reduced to a neighborhood cautionary tale. With their investment accounts completely seized and their credit scores destroyed by the massive loan default, Bradley's parents had absolutely nowhere to go. So they packed whatever clothing they were allowed to keep into the trunk of a rented sedan and drove straight to Jamal and Rebecca's house. In Sylvia's deeply entitled mind, she fully expected her daughter and son-in-law to simply open their doors and offer up their guest bedrooms indefinitely. She genuinely believed that after years of treating Jamal like a second-class citizen, she could just invoke the sacred rule of family loyalty and demand a free place to live. But Sylvia severely underestimated the ironclad boundaries Jamal had built around his home. When the doorbell rang, Rebecca was upstairs safely reading a book. Jamal had specifically told his wife to stay out of sight while he handled the situation. He opened the heavy oak front door and stepped out onto the porch, physically blocking the entrance with his tall, imposing frame. Sylvia stood there clutching her designer purse, her eyes red from crying, fully expecting to be invited inside for a warm cup of tea and a comforting embrace. Jamal did not even say hello. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a neatly folded piece of printer paper. He held it out to his mother-in-law. Sylvia took it, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "It is a printed list of 2-star motels located outside the city limits," Jamal explained smoothly. "I highlighted the ones that offer weekly rates and accept cash deposits. You should probably call ahead to check their availability." Sylvia stared at the piece of paper as if it were covered in poison. "Jamal, you cannot be serious," she gasped, stepping forward. "We are your family. We just lost our home. You have 3 empty guest rooms in this house. You have to let us stay here until we can figure things out. Where is Rebecca? Tell my daughter to come down here right now." "Rebecca is resting," Jamal replied, his voice dropping to a freezing absolute register that left zero room for negotiation. "And my home is not a sanctuary for people who actively funded my wife's emotional abuse for decades. You spent years telling Rebecca she was a disappointment compared to your golden boy. You remortgaged your entire life to fund a criminal enterprise just to brag about your son at the country club. You made your financial bed, Sylvia. Now you get to sleep in it at a budget motel." Sylvia opened her mouth to scream, to unleash the same toxic venom she had used to control her family for years. But Jamal did not give her the chance. Without another word, he stepped back inside his beautiful, peaceful home and shut the heavy oak door directly in her face. The sharp click of the deadbolt locking echoed loudly across the quiet suburban street, officially sealing Bradley's parents out in the cold. Their complete financial devastation set the stage perfectly for the ultimate main event. Exactly 1 week After Sylvia was turned away from Jamal's porch, the federal criminal trial of her beloved son officially began in downtown Manhattan. Bradley walked into the brightly lit courtroom wearing an ill-fitting gray suit that looked nothing like his custom wedding tuxedo. He looked completely terrified, his eyes darting frantically around the gallery searching for anyone to support him. But his family was completely bankrupt, and not a single person showed up to sit behind him. And because his parents no longer had a single dime to their names to hire a private defense team, the brilliant tech CEO was forced to sit at the defense table next to an exhausted, overworked public defender holding a massive stack of undisputed wire fraud evidence. The federal trial of a man who left a perfectly documented paper trail of his own crimes did not take very long. In fact, it was one of the fastest corporate fraud convictions the District of New York had seen in years. Bradley's overworked public defender strongly advised him to take a plea deal, but Bradley's ego simply would not allow him to admit absolute defeat. He dragged the legal process out, forcing a trial that only served to publicly humiliate him further. By the time sentencing day finally arrived, the financial media had already lost interest. He was no longer a sensational headline. He was just another failed scam artist waiting to receive his federal inmate number. Because the sentencing was a matter of public record, the court provided a secure Zoom link for interested parties and victims to observe the proceedings. I did not fly back to New York. I simply poured myself a glass of cold, sparkling water, took a seat at the heavy oak dining table in my Tuscan villa, and clicked the link on my laptop. The high-definition camera inside the courtroom offered a perfectly clear view of the defense table. When the bailiff escorted Bradley into the room, I actually let out a quiet gasp of surprise. The physical toll of the last few months had been absolutely devastating. The man on my screen looked like he had aged 10 years. His hair, which he used to spend hundreds of dollars maintaining at luxury salons, was thinning and heavily streaked with gray. He had lost a significant amount of weight, making his cheekbones look sharp and hollow. Instead of a custom-tailored Italian suit, he was wearing a standard-issue drab olive-green jumpsuit from the Federal Holding Facility. But the most striking detail was not his physical appearance. It was the absolute crushing isolation radiating from him. As Bradley sat down at the heavy wooden table, he slowly turned his head to look at the wooden gallery benches behind him. He was searching for a familiar face. He was looking for his mother to cry for him, or his father to stand up and demand justice, or even a sympathetic friend from his old country club life. The benches were completely empty. Not a single person from his family showed up to support him. Sylvia and her husband were too busy working minimum-wage retail jobs just to afford their weekly motel rent. Serena was actively cooperating with federal prosecutors to minimize her own financial liabilities legally, distancing herself from him in every possible way. And Jamal and Rebecca had officially blocked his number, completely erasing him from their peaceful lives. Bradley had spent his entire existence using people for his own personal gain, and now that he had absolutely nothing left to offer, he was entirely alone. The federal judge, a stern older woman with zero tolerance for corporate theft, took her seat at the bench. She looked down at the massive stack of forensic accounting files I had personally compiled. She did not look impressed. Mr. Bradley, the judge, began, her voice echoing coldly through my laptop speakers. You have been convicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and the deliberate misappropriation of investor capital. During this trial, you have continuously attempted to deflect blame. You blamed your investors for expecting too much. You blamed your ex-wife for revoking a license you did not own. You even attempted to blame your own parents for co-signing the loans you fraudulently acquired. Bradley stood up, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the edge of the defense table. Your Honor, please, he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. I just wanted to build something great. I wanted to make my family proud. I never meant to hurt anybody. If you just give me probation, I can work and pay everyone back. I am a visionary. I can build a new company. The judge stared at him with absolute disgust. You are not a visionary, she stated flatly, cutting off his desperate rambling. You are a common thief who used a corporate entity as a shield for your own greed. You stole $20 million to buy luxury cars and designer handbags while pretending to be a genius. You destroyed the financial security of your own parents, and you defrauded investors who trusted your word. Bradley lowered his head, openly sobbing in the silent courtroom. There was no one left to manipulate, no one left to gaslight. The absolute reality of his actions had finally caught up to him. The court finds that your actions were deliberate, calculated, and entirely driven by extreme narcissism, the judge announced, her voice rising with absolute authority. For the crimes of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, I sentence you to 120 months. That is exactly 10 years in a federal penitentiary. You are also ordered to pay full financial restitution to your victims. The judge picked up her heavy wooden gavel and struck the sounding block with a deafening crack. It was the absolute finality of the sound that made Bradley flinch. Two large federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing him roughly by the arms to escort him out of the courtroom to begin his decade-long sentence. As they pulled him away from the table, he looked directly up at the camera broadcasting the Zoom feed. For a fleeting second, his hollow, terrified eyes met mine through the digital screen. I did not blink. I simply reached out and closed my laptop, shutting the screen and erasing him from my life forever. Closing my laptop on Bradley's 10-year prison sentence felt like exhaling a breath I had been holding for 11 years. The digital screen went completely black and my toxic past officially ceased to exist. But while the federal justice system had finally closed the book on my ex-husband, my own financial journey was just reaching its absolute peak. 3 days after the sentencing hearing, I boarded a first-class flight from Milan back to New York. I was not returning to revisit my old life. I was returning to permanently cash out. Richard Montgomery had personally summoned me to the executive boardroom of his venture capital firm in downtown Manhattan. I walked into the massive glass-walled office, wearing a sharp-tailored suit, feeling entirely in control of my destiny. I sat across from this billionaire investor at a long, polished mahogany conference table overlooking the sprawling city skyline. I was no longer just the brilliant lead forensic auditor he had hired to clean up his portfolio. I was the sole legal owner of the most highly sought-after risk assessment algorithm in the financial tech industry. Richard did not waste my time with casual small talk. He reached into his leather briefcase and slid a thick, cream-colored folder across the table toward me. "Audrey, you have done incredible work for this firm," Richard said, his gravelly voice echoing in the quiet room. "But we both know your true value goes far beyond forensic accounting." During the trial, the entire financial sector got a very clear look at how flawlessly your software detects market volatility. I have 3 different tech conglomerates quietly asking me if you are willing to license the patent to them. I do not want to share it. I want to buy the algorithm outright and integrate it exclusively into my firm. I opened the folder and looked at the single sheet of paper inside. It was a formal letter of intent to purchase my intellectual property. I slowly scanned down to the bottom of the page and looked at the purchase price. It was a staggering 8-figure sum. Specifically, it was $45 million. I sat back in my leather chair and looked at the massive number. For a brief second, I thought about all those lavish dinners, where Bradley had proudly stood up and taken all the credit for my genius. I thought about how he used to pat me on the shoulder and tell his wealthy friends that I was just the quiet, boring accountant who handled his bookkeeping. He had spent years standing under the bright spotlight while I stayed up until 2 in the morning writing the complex code that actually made his fake empire function. He was nothing but a glossy marketing brochure. I was the actual engine. And now I was holding $45 million in pure earned equity, while he was wearing a green jumpsuit in a federal holding cell. "This is a very generous offer," Richard I replied, keeping my expression completely professional. "But if I sell the exclusive rights to Montgomery Capital, I want it written into the contract that I retain complete autonomy over how the software is updated. I built the architecture and I know how to scale it." Richard smiled, a genuine look of deep respect crossing his face. "I would not have it any other way, Audrey," he agreed. "You are the brains of the operation. You always were." I picked up the heavy gold-plated pen resting on the table and signed my name on the dotted line. There was no hesitation and no regret. In a matter of seconds, the exclusive rights to the algorithm were officially transferred, and an 8-figure wire transfer was immediately initiated directly into my private offshore accounts. I shook Richard's hand, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out of the Manhattan skyscraper as a completely self-made multimillionaire. I did not stick around New York to celebrate. I immediately headed to the airport and caught the next flight straight back to Italy. The Tuscan stone villa I had been renting was beautiful, but it was only meant to be a temporary sanctuary. Now that the massive 8-figure payout had officially cleared my bank account, I was ready to establish my permanent roots. I drove straight from the airport to the sparkling shores of Lake Como, the exact place where I had been sitting when Bradley first called me in a panic. I met with a high-end Italian real estate broker at a historic, sprawling waterfront estate. The property featured a private boat dock, lush terraced gardens, and breathtaking unobstructed views of the surrounding mountains. It was the kind of absolute luxury that Serena had desperately tried to secure by marrying a fraud. But I did not need a man to buy it for me. The broker handed me the final purchasing documents. I did not need to apply for a mortgage. I did not need to beg a bank for a loan or use fraudulent collateral like my former in-laws. I sat at a marble table overlooking the pristine blue water, signed the deed, and bought the entire multi-million-dollar Italian estate, completely in cash. 4 months after I purchased my waterfront estate in Italy, the sprawling property had truly become my personal sanctuary. I spent my mornings managing my venture capital portfolios from a sunlit home office, and my afternoons walking through the lush terraced gardens overlooking Lake Como. The toxic chaos of New York felt like a distant fading memory, but I did not have to enjoy my absolute freedom entirely alone. On a bright Friday afternoon, a sleek black town car pulled into my long, winding driveway, carrying the only 2 people from my past who actually deserved to share in my victory. Jamal and Rebecca stepped out of the vehicle looking completely transformed. During the years they were tethered to Bradley and Sylvia, they always carried a subtle underlying tension, as if they were constantly bracing for the next family disaster. Now that heavy burden was completely gone. Jamal had traded his stiff, dark corporate suits for a relaxed linen shirt and sunglasses, looking completely at ease. Rebecca looked absolutely radiant, her smile genuine and bright, as she ran up the stone steps to pull me into a tight, warm embrace. We spent the first hour walking through the massive villa, admiring the historic architecture and the breathtaking views of the sparkling blue water. Eventually, we settled onto the expansive marble terrace. I opened a bottle of vintage Barolo wine that cost more than Bradley's fraudulent wedding cake and poured 3 generous glasses. Jamal took a slow sip, looking out at the majestic mountains, reflecting off the pristine lake. I have to admit, Jamal said, a deep chuckle rumbling in his chest. "This completely ruins the Hamptons for me. If I had known forensic accounting paid this well, I might have reconsidered corporate law." We all laughed, the sound carrying easily over the quiet, warm breeze. We sat around the heavy stone table sharing artisan cheeses and completely basking in the absolute peace of the afternoon. There was no need to pretend or walk on eggshells. We were simply 3 successful professionals who had successfully navigated our way out of a burning building. Rebecca set her crystal wineglass down and reached across the table to gently squeeze my hand. Her expression shifted from joyful to deeply sincere. "I never really got the chance to properly thank you for what you did," Rebecca said, her voice soft but incredibly steady. "You do not owe me any thanks, Rebecca," I replied warmly. "I was just settling my own debts." "No, you did so much more than that," Rebecca insisted, shaking her head. "You have to understand what it was like growing up in that house. My entire life, my mother made me feel like an extra in Bradley's movie. He was the golden child, the brilliant visionary who could do no wrong. Whenever he failed, it was always someone else's fault. But whenever I succeeded, my parents barely even noticed. I spent 30 years bending over backward, trying to earn a fraction of the respect they blindly handed to him. Jamal placed a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder, his eyes filled with quiet pride as she spoke her truth. When you exposed his massive fraud, you did not just destroy his fake company. Rebecca continued, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You exposed the absolute toxic rot at the core of my family. You forced my parents to show their true colors. When my mother tried to frame Jamal for federal crimes just to save her precious son, it finally broke the spell for me. I realized they would gladly throw my husband in prison and destroy my marriage if it served their narrative. Rebecca took a deep breath, sitting up straighter in her chair. For the first time in my life, I do not feel guilty for ignoring their phone calls. I do not feel obligated to fix their financial ruin or endure their endless emotional manipulation. You completely dismantled the illusion, Audrey. You gave Jamal and me the permission we needed to finally cut ties and walk away without a single ounce of guilt. You did not just free yourself. You freed us too. I smiled, raising my glass toward her. To cutting dead weight, I proposed. To absolute freedom, Jamal added, clinking his glass against mine. We drank to our shared victory, the heavy emotional conversation naturally dissolving back into light-hearted jokes and stories about their flight over. The afternoon was flawless, but the universe has a very strange way of reminding you that the past always tries to reach out from the dark. As we were finishing the last of the wine, my estate manager walked out onto the terrace, holding a small silver tray containing the daily afternoon post. He set it gently on the table and quietly excused himself. I casually reached over to sort through the small stack of mail. Most of it was standard Italian correspondence and thick, glossy architecture magazines. But tucked at the very bottom of the elegant pile was a stark, coarse brown envelope. It looked completely out of place against the beautiful marble table. I pulled it out, my fingers brushing against the cheap rough paper. There was no return address label, only a harsh black ink stamp pressed aggressively into the top left corner. The stamp bore the official seal of a medium-security federal penitentiary located in upstate New York. Jamal and Rebecca stopped talking, noticing the sudden freezing shift in my posture. Right in the center of the envelope, written in the frantic, messy handwriting I had spent 11 years trying to decipher, was my name. It was a letter from Bradley. The air on the marble terrace suddenly felt completely still. Jamal lowered his crystal wineglass slowly, his dark eyes locked onto the harsh brown envelope resting in my hand. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her chair, the joyful, relaxed energy of our Italian afternoon evaporating in an absolute instant. The thick, coarse paper felt like a physical intrusion of dirt into my pristine new world. It was a letter from a federal inmate, specifically the exact man we had just spent the last 2 hours celebrating our permanent freedom from. I held the cheap envelope up to the warm afternoon sunlight. It was incredibly heavy, bulging slightly at the seams. Knowing Bradley, there were easily 10 to 15 tightly written pages crammed inside. For 11 years, I knew his exact patterns of communication. Whenever he was caught in a massive lie or backed into a corner, he never just gave a simple, honest apology. He deployed overwhelming volume. He truly believed that if he wrote enough words, spun enough elaborate excuses, and cried enough tears onto the paper, he could exhaust his audience into feeling sorry for him. I ran my thumb over the federal ink stamp. Inside this envelope was undoubtedly a masterpiece of narcissistic manipulation. There would be paragraphs detailing the harsh, miserable conditions of his concrete prison cell, specifically designed to make me feel incredibly guilty for sitting on a multi-million-dollar waterfront estate. There would be long, sprawling sentences blaming his mother for raising him with impossible expectations. He would probably claim that Serena had actively brainwashed him into stealing the money, and he would swear that losing me was the only true regret of his entirely fraudulent life. Rebecca leaned forward, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Are you going to open it?" she asked softly. Her voice carried the faint lingering trauma of a sister who had spent her entire life being emotionally manipulated by his endless words. Jamal sat perfectly still, ready to support whatever decision I made, but I could see the protective tension tightening his jaw. A year ago, the old Audrey would have torn that envelope open the second it arrived. I would have excused myself from the table, locked myself in the master bathroom, and read every single line until my eyes burned. I would have aggressively analyzed his grammar, searching for hidden meanings and looking for any tiny sign of genuine remorse. I would have let his toxic narrative completely invade my brain, giving him the absolute power to ruin my perfect day. I would have spent hours drafting a brilliant cutting response in my head just to prove to him that I was smarter and stronger. But standing there holding the physical manifestation of his absolute desperation, I felt something entirely different. I did not feel angry. I did not feel a sudden rush of vindictive triumph. I felt absolutely nothing. I realized in that exact moment that hate is not the opposite of love. Hate requires passion. Hate requires you to expend your own valuable emotional energy focusing on someone else. The true opposite of love is absolute unbothered apathy. Bradley was sitting in a tiny cell thousands of miles away, desperately hoping that his words still held some kind of emotional power over me. He wanted me to read his excuses because being hated by me was still vastly better than being completely forgotten by me. Reading that letter would only validate his delusion that we were still connected. "I am not going to open it," I told Rebecca, a calm, genuine smile returning to my face. His words simply do not matter anymore. The sun was beginning to dip below the mountain peaks, casting a cool evening shadow across the terrace. I suggested we move our conversation inside the villa. Jamal grabbed the expensive bottle of Barolo, and we walked through the massive glass doors into the main living room. My estate manager had already lit a roaring fire in the grand stone fireplace to ward off the evening chill. The bright flames crackled loudly, throwing warm golden light across the expensive hardwood floors. I walked directly toward the massive stone hearth. I did not pause to weigh my options. I did not wonder if there was some crucial legal confession hidden in the pages. I did not care. I simply pulled my arm back and tossed the thick, unopened brown envelope directly into the center of the roaring fire. Jamal and Rebecca stood quietly by the leather sofa, watching as the bright orange flames immediately curled around the cheap federal paper. The edges blackened and curled instantly, the government ink stamp melting away in seconds. We stood shoulder to shoulder and watched the last remaining piece of Bradley's desperate existence turn into completely weightless gray ash, floating up the massive stone chimney and disappearing forever into the Italian night. The morning after Bradley's letter turned to ash in my fireplace, I woke up long before the sun rose over the Italian mountains. The house was entirely quiet. Jamal and Rebecca were still fast asleep in one of the guest wings, enjoying the kind of deep, uninterrupted rest that only comes when you are no longer weighed down by toxic family obligations. I poured myself a single cup of black coffee, unlocked the heavy glass doors of the terrace, and walked outside into the cool, crisp dawn. Beyond the manicured gardens, my property sloped downward into a massive, sprawling private vineyard. The neat, endless rows of green vines stretched out as far as the eye could see, disappearing into the morning mist rising off Lake Como. I stepped off the stone patio and began walking slowly down the dirt path, the rich earth crunching softly beneath my leather boots. As I walked through the quiet vineyard, running my fingers lightly over the dew-covered leaves, I found myself reflecting on the incredible, chaotic journey of the last few months. I thought about the girl I was a year ago, sitting in a dark home office quietly balancing ledgers while my husband was busy spending my money in luxury hotel rooms with another woman. I thought about the sheer suffocating weight of his family's constant disapproval and the silent expectation that I was just supposed to endure it. There is a massive unspoken rule in our modern society about how women are supposed to handle betrayal. Whenever a woman is cheated on, lied to, or financially ruined by a partner, the world immediately tells her to take the high road. We are constantly conditioned to be the bigger person. We are told that true grace means packing our bags, maintaining our composure, and walking away quietly into the night. Society applauds the dignified ex-wife who refuses to fight over the assets, praising her for leaving the toxic situation with nothing but her wounded pride. But as I stood there in the middle of my multi-million-dollar Italian estate, breathing in the fresh mountain air, I realized what a devastating trap that ideology really is. Being the bigger person is a beautiful concept, but unfortunately the high road does not pay the bills. Walking away quietly does not issue federal indictments. And leaving your hard-earned assets behind so a narcissist can fund his mistress's lavish lifestyle is not an act of grace. It is an act of financial surrender. I decided very early on that I was not going to be the graceful, quiet victim. I realized that true justice is not about seeking petty emotional revenge. True justice is about absolute, undeniable accountability. It is about holding people legally and financially responsible for the damage they cause, using the exact same systems they tried to use against you. Bradley truly believed he could steal my intellectual property, leverage his parents' home, and defraud billionaire investors without ever facing a single consequence. Serena thought she could secure a lifetime of luxury simply by signing an ironclad prenuptial agreement and mocking my lack of ambition. Sylvia thought she could maintain her elite country club status by continuously shielding her golden child from the reality of his own failures. They all operated on the exact same fatal assumption. They assumed I would just step aside. They relied entirely on the expectation that I would be the good, obedient wife who avoided conflict at all costs. They wanted me to cry foul for a standard divorce and disappear so they could enjoy the $50 million empire I had built for them. But I did not scream at the Hamptons' wedding. I did not throw a silver cake knife across a crowded banquet hall. I did not sit on a bare hardwood floor and record a crying apology video for the internet. I simply gathered the raw data. I followed the money, meticulously documented the fraud, and handed the absolute truth over to the people who had the power to enforce the consequences. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the warm liquid chase away the morning chill. I looked back up the hill at my beautiful stone villa, paid for entirely in cash from the sale of my own genius. I had won precisely because I refused to play their emotional games. I stayed entirely grounded in the facts, the contracts, and the numbers. They thought I was just a woman with a calculator. They didn't realize a calculator is a deadly weapon if you know how to do the math. The sun finally crested over the jagged peaks of the Italian mountains, flooding the entire valley with brilliant golden light. I finished the last drop of my coffee and turned back toward my stone villa. The massive house stood as a quiet, beautiful monument to my own resilience. I walked up the stone steps, feeling the gentle warmth of the morning sun on my face, and took one last moment to appreciate the absolute perfect balance of how everything had finally settled. It is a profound realization when you finally understand that the universe does have a sense of justice, provided you are willing to do the heavy lifting to enforce it. Thousands of miles away across the Atlantic Ocean, the people who tried to destroy my life were waking up to their own permanent realities. At this exact moment, Bradley was likely being jolted awake by a harsh, buzzing mechanical alarm inside a medium-security federal penitentiary. Instead of waking up on high-thread count Egyptian cotton sheets in a luxury penthouse, he was opening his eyes to a tiny concrete cell. There were no venture capitalists to impress. There were no expensive suits to wear. He was just another federal inmate assigned to scrub cafeteria trays for 12 cents an hour, slowly chipping away at a massive $20 million court-ordered restitution that he would absolutely never be able to repay. He had 10 long years to sit in a metal chair and think about the wife he threw away. A few hours south of his prison, Serena was probably waiting in the rain at a public bus stop. The federal government had seized her bank accounts, auctioned off her designer wardrobe, and repossessed her luxury sports car. The glamorous influencer who once bragged to millions of followers about her untouchable wealth was now living in a tiny, overpriced studio apartment with a broken radiator. Her wages from the mid-tier chain restaurant were actively being garnished by the authorities. Every time she handed a laminated menu to a customer, she was reminded that her desperate greed had permanently traded her youth and her freedom for a massive pile of federal debt. And then there was Sylvia. She and her husband never made it back to the country club. The bank had successfully liquidated all their assets to cover the fraudulent loans they had so eagerly co-signed. They were now living in a cramped, noisy two-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood they used to openly mock. Sylvia, a woman who once dictated the social hierarchy of elite suburban housewives, now spent her days clipping grocery coupons and hiding her face under a cheap baseball cap whenever she went to the discount supermarket, absolutely terrified of running into someone from her old life. She had sacrificed everything to protect the illusion of her golden child, and the illusion had left her with absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, my life was just beginning. I had successfully transitioned from being a hidden asset in a toxic marriage to a fully independent, self-made multimillionaire. I had the respect of industry titans like Richard Montgomery. I had the unwavering loyalty of genuine family members like Jamal and Rebecca, who had also successfully broken free from the cycle of emotional abuse. I had a thriving career, a beautiful home, and most importantly, I had my absolute peace of mind. I did not have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's fragile ego anymore. I did not have to apologize for being intelligent, capable, and driven. I had finally learned that the most powerful thing a woman can do is fully recognize her own undeniable worth and aggressively refuse to let anyone discount it. As I opened the heavy glass doors to step back inside my beautiful, quiet home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the entire brutal journey. The betrayal was incredibly painful, but it was also the exact catalyst I needed to stop playing small. It forced me to stop protecting a man who did not respect me and start protecting the future I actually deserved. If you take anything away from my story, let it be this. Do not ever let anyone convince you that standing up for yourself is an act of cruelty. Do not let toxic people guilt you into accepting less than you deserve simply because they share your last name or wear a wedding ring. You have the absolute right to demand respect, and you have the absolute right to walk away when it is denied. Sometimes karma needs a little help from a forensic accountant. Have you ever let someone dig their own grave and just handed them the shovel? Tell me your story in the comments. Like, subscribe, and never let anyone tell you your boundaries are too harsh. Until next time. The most profound lesson to be extracted from this entire ordeal is that society's definition of taking the high road is often a dangerous trap designed to make victims quietly surrender their boundaries and their hard-earned assets. We are frequently conditioned to believe that moving on with grace requires us to walk away with absolutely nothing, leaving the perpetrators completely unbothered by the devastating consequences of their betrayal. However, this story fundamentally redefines what true grace and female empowerment look like in the face of absolute deception. The core lesson is that you do not have to engage in toxic screaming matches, hurl desperate insults, or destroy your own moral character to achieve real justice. Instead, the ultimate form of self-preservation is maintaining your quiet composure, recognizing your absolute worth, and letting the cold, undisputed facts speak entirely for themselves. Narcissistic individuals like Bradley and his enablers thrive on your emotional reactions because your anger validates their ongoing importance in your life. By choosing absolute, unbothered apathy over vindictive rage, you completely strip them of their power. Furthermore, this narrative underscores the critical, undeniable importance of financial independence and meticulous self-protection. When you fiercely protect your intellect, your legal rights, and your resources, you build an impenetrable fortress around your personal peace. You learn that holding toxic people legally and financially accountable is never an act of bitterness, but rather a necessary, healthy enforcement of your boundaries. The greatest revenge is simply stepping aside, allowing manipulative individuals to be entirely crushed by the weight of their own lies, and using your brilliance to build a beautiful life without them. If you have ever had to enforce strict boundaries to protect your peace from those who tried to diminish your worth, please share your own story of triumph in the comments below.